I decided to do my presentation on the attack on Pearl Harbor. So, in all of my research, I found that there are really three main questions that we have to ask in order to understand the purpose and the motives behind the attack on Pearl Harbor. And those are, first of all, why did Japan attack the United States? Second, why was the attack so unanticipated by the US? Why didn't they expect it beforehand? And then, third, what effect did the attack have on the ultimate outcome of World War II? So, to begin, why did Japan attack the United States? Well, there are several events leading up to this, so I'm going to go through a sort of timeline here. First of all, in September of 1940, Japan they conquered part of northern Indochina. Indochina is a region in southern Asia that consists of places like Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. I don't know how to say that country, but they took the northern area of that region, and because of that, the U.S. placed an embargo on their trade, and which greatly limited their trade between the United States and them. And then in April of 1941, Japan signed a neutrality treaty with the Soviet Union, and this was because now that they had part of Southeast Asia as well as part of China, they didn't want any risk of the Soviet Union turning on them and then having someone at their backs attacking their territory. So they signed this neutrality treaty with the Soviet Union. And then a few months later, in July of 1941, the United States, Great Britain, and the Netherlands all froze Japan's assets, which pretty much prevented them from buying oil, and consequently, their military was hugely crippled. Their army suffered, their air force and their navy were pretty much useless without the use of oil. So, then the next couple events occurred between July and then the December of 1941. So, first of all, Japan tried, but then they failed to find a settlement that would lift the embargo, but without limiting their expansion, because the United States was willing to lift the embargo on terms only of Japan stopping their conquest and returning lots of the lands that they had taken. And Japan didn't want to settle for that. They wanted to find a way that they could keep their expansion and that they could also lift the embargo. And so they secretly set November 28th of that year as the deadline that they would accept any settlement, and then without going to war. And then later, the Japanese military devised a war plan to overtake the entire Pacific Ocean, all of the islands throughout it, and then they established a defensive perimeter in the central and southwest areas of the ocean. So, because the U.S. Navy fleet was such a threat to their attempts to take over the Pacific Ocean, they decided to bomb it. And at the time, the fleet had been located in Pearl Harbor in Oahu, Hawaii. So, on December 7th of 1941, the Japanese initiated an air attack on Pearl Harbor, and they bombed the entire fleet that they found there. So during this attack, over 3,500 Americans were either killed or wounded badly, and 18 ships were either sunk or badly damaged. And that total included the 8 battleships of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. So they did accomplish their mission in trying to destroy that fleet to clear up the Pacific Ocean. And why was this attack unanticipated? Why didn't the U.S. have knowledge of it beforehand? Well, part of this was due to the fact that the warning radar technology was still under heavy development. It was a new technology that wasn't exactly precise. It hadn't been finely tuned to give really accurate readings yet. So, the Japanese planes actually were detected by this warning radar before the attack, but they were mistaken for an American air fleet that was expected from the West Coast. Then Washington, as soon as they found out of the attack, Washington sent warning to the military stationed at Pearl Harbor, but unfortunately, that warning did not arrive until after the attack. At the time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the president, and this is one of the things that he said. He says, "Yesterday, December 7th of 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by a naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people, in their righteous might, will win through absolute victory." End quote. This was one of the speeches that really gave a fire to the American people and kind of gave them hope after this attack. This really destroyed the morale for a while, but this speech helped build it back up. So this is part of an account of someone who was aboard the USS Arizona during the bombing of Pearl Harbor. He says, "Just as we left the mess area, we heard this noise. We went outside to take a look because it's usually very quiet. When we arrived, we could hear and see there were airplanes. I looked across the bow of the ship and could see large plumes of smoke coming up from Ford Island. The bombing was becoming heavier all around us, and we knew this was really it. A deafening roar filled the room and the entire ship shuddered. It was the forward magazine. 1.5 million pounds of gunpowder exploding in a massive fireball, disintegrating the whole forward part of the ship. Only moments before, I stood with my gun crew just a few feet from the center of the explosion. My whole gun crew was killed, everyone on top. The sound of someone shouting, 'Put out the fire,' cut through the sound of the battle, but it was obvious that the ship was doomed. I made my way to the side of the ship, which by this time was sinking fast, and jumped off the fantail. The shoreline of Ford Island was only a short distance. There was burning oil all around the ship, but the aft was clear. After swimming to shore, I was taken to the Naval Air Station. Every table in the mess hall had a man on it." That's the end of the quote. So this quote, I thought it was an interesting thing because it showed really the surprise and the element of surprise that the Japanese had planned in this attack. So this was one of the major turning points in World War II. Online, I found this quote that says, "In one stroke, the Japanese Navy scored a brilliant success and assured their ultimate defeat." Basically, what that's saying there is, although that they did accomplish their desire to destroy the American fleet, they pretty much secured their defeat, their ultimate defeat, as it says, because later on, well, I'll tell you in a second. The attack on Pearl Harbor pretty much proved to be the turning point in America's involvement in World War II. Prior to this, America had decided to stay out of it and to allow the other countries to take their course. But the day following this attack, the United States declared war on Japan. And shortly after that, then the United States dropped atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which devastated the Japanese Empire, their people, to the point of surrender. It had such a devastating effect that they really couldn't resist. So after that, the loss of Japan as an ally weakened the Nazis so much that they could not resist the opposition dealt by the Allied forces. So ultimately, this attack is, in my opinion, what led to the end of the war and what led to the Americans being involved and making that difference. Then FDR says in his speech also, "With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph. So help us God." So although the attack on Pearl Harbor was a pretty terrible event, it really ignited a big fire within America that drove them to end World War II. So that is my presentation. Thank you guys for listening, and go read some books.